Look at yourself, Nyla. You are pathetic. You think wearing a thrift store dress makes you one of us? You're nothing but the charity case I divorced. The music stopped. The laughter died. 300 of the city's wealthiest elites turned to watch a man destroy a woman who had nothing left to lose. Nyla Parker stood there, trembling, champagne dripping from her hem, staring into the eyes of the man she once loved. She thought her life was over. She thought she was alone. Mr. Wells, I believe you're standing in my way. What happens when an arrogant ex-husband pushes too far, only to realize the woman he insulted is the only person the billionaire came to see? This is the story of ambition, betrayal, and the sweetest revenge of all. The Obsidian Gala was not merely a party, it was a battlefield dressed in silk and velvet. Held in the grand ballroom of the Pierce Tower, a structure of glass and steel that pierced the clouds above New York City, it was the night where alliances were forged and reputations were slaughtered. Nyla Parker stood at the entrance, her fingers tightening around the small, beaded clutch that had belonged to her grandmother. She felt like an imposter. The invitation had arrived anonymously 3 days ago, slipped under the door of her studio apartment in Queens. She shouldn't be here. She knew it. The air inside smelled of expensive perfume, old money, and cold ambition. "Chin up, Parker," a voice whispered in her ear. Nyla turned to see Valentina Cruz, her one ally in this shark tank. Valentina was wearing a sharp crimson power suit that screamed defiance. As a rising fashion editor, Valentina belonged here. Nyla, a freelance architect struggling to pay rent, did not. "Val, maybe I should go," Nyla whispered, her eyes darting around the room. "Keaton is here. I saw his car outside." "Of course Keaton is here," Valentina scoffed, linking her arm through Nyla's. "He's the new VP of Development for Anderson Pierce. But that doesn't mean he owns the room. You have just as much right to be here. You're the one who fixed the structural flaws in the Bayside project, even if he never gave you credit." Nyla winced. The Bayside project. That was the wedge that had finally split her marriage to Keaton Wells apart. For 2 years, she had stayed up late, redrawing his blueprints, correcting his math, and refining his vision. When the project won the Golden Beam Award, Keaton took the stage alone. When she asked why he didn't mention her, he told her she was too emotional to understand branding. He filed for divorce a month later, leaving her with nothing but debt and a broken heart. "I'm just here to network, Val. If I can get one card, just one lead for a freelance gig, it's worth the anxiety." "That's the spirit," Valentina said, steering her toward the bar. "Just avoid the center of the room. That's where the ego monsters feed." But avoiding the center proved impossible. The room was designed like a whirlpool, pulling everyone toward the VIP circle, where Anderson Pierce, the host and real estate tycoon, held court. And standing right next to him, laughing a little too loudly, holding a glass of scotch like a weapon, was Keaton Wells. He looked good. That was the unfair part. Keaton had the kind of jawline that sold magazines, and the kind of eyes that could lie without blinking. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than Nyla's car. Hanging on his arm was Mira Steele, a socialite whose family owned half the steel mills in Pennsylvania. Mira was stunning, cruel, and exactly the kind of trophy Keaton had always wanted. Nyla tried to shrink behind a decorative ice sculpture, but fate, it seemed, was in a cruel mood. "Well, well," a voice boomed, cutting through the ambient jazz. "If it isn't the little mouse." Nyla froze. The room seemed to tilt. She turned slowly to find Keaton standing there, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. Mira Steele stood beside him, looking Neela up and down with a smirk that could peel paint. "Hello, Keaton," Nyla said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "Mira, I didn't know the waitstaff was allowed to mingle with the guests," Mira giggled, covering her mouth with a diamond-encrusted hand. "I'm a guest, Mira," Neela said quietly. Keaton laughed, a harsh barking sound. "A guest? Who invited you? Did you sneak in through the kitchen, or did you seduce a doorman?" "I received an invitation," Neela replied, gripping her clutch. "Now, if you'll excuse me." She tried to step around him, but Keaton sidestepped, blocking her path. The circle around them began to tighten. People sensing drama were like sharks sensing blood. The chatter died down. Eyes turned. "You don't walk away from me when I'm speaking," Keaton hissed, his charming facade cracking to reveal the bully underneath. "You think you can just waltz into Anderson Pierce's gala wearing— what is that, polyester?" He reached out and flicked the strap of her dress. It was a deep emerald gown Nyla had sewn herself, reworking a vintage piece she found at a flea market. It was elegant, modest, and beautiful, but against the backdrop of haute couture, Keaton made it feel like a rag. "Leave me alone, Keaton," Neela warned, her voice rising. "Or what?" Keaton stepped closer, looming over her. "You'll correct my blueprints? You'll cry? Go home, Nyla. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing me just by existing in the same zip code." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Even the string quartet seemed to have faltered. Valentina Cruz was pushing her way through the crowd, shouting Neela's name, but the wall of bodies was too thick. Neela was trapped in the center of the arena. Anderson Pierce, the host, watched from a few feet away. He didn't intervene. He was a man who valued strength, and he wanted to see if his new VP, Keaton, could handle dominance or if he was just a loudmouth. "I'm not leaving," Neela said, finding a reservoir of strength she didn't know she possessed. "I have a right to be here. My work—" "Your work?" Keaton bellowed, causing several people to jump. "You have no work. You have no legacy. You were a secretary I married out of pity because you looked lonely in the break room. I gave you a life, Nyla, and you suffocated me with your mediocrity." Tears pricked Nyla's eyes, hot and stinging. It wasn't just the insults. It was the rewriting of history. The late nights she spent teaching him how to use CAD software, the speeches she wrote for him, the way she supported him when his mother died. He was erasing her humanity to boost his own ego. Mira Steele laughed, leaning into Keaton. "Oh, honey, don't waste your breath. She's clearly looking for a handout. Maybe we should write her a check for a cab." Keaton reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off a $100 bill and crumbled it into a ball. "Here," Keaton sneered, tossing the bill. It hit Nyla's chest and fell to the floor. "Take it. Get yourself a meal that isn't instant noodles, and then get out of my sight." The humiliation was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut. Nyla stared at the bill on the polished marble floor. If she bent down to pick it up, she admitted defeat. If she ran, she admitted defeat. She looked up, locking eyes with Keaton. "You are a small, small man, Keaton, and one day everyone will see the cracks in the foundation you didn't build." Keaton's face turned purple. His narcissism couldn't handle the public pushback. He raised his hand, pointing a finger aggressively in her face. "Security," Keaton shouted, looking around. "Get this woman out of here. She's harassing the guests." Two burly security guards started to move toward them. The crowd parted. Nyla felt the walls closing in. She took a step back, her heel catching on the hem of her dress. She stumbled, barely catching herself. "Pathetic," Keaton spat. Absolutely pathetic. He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms. I apologize, everyone. Just a little domestic debris that needed clearing up. Please, enjoy the champagne. He turned back to Nyla, a cruel grin on his face. Go back to the gutter, Nyla. No one here wants you. No one here even knows who you are. That was the moment Nyla's heart truly broke. Not because she loved him, that love had died years ago, but because she feared he was right. In this world of power and money, she was invisible. She turned to run, tears finally spilling over her cheeks, and then the double doors at the top of the grand staircase flew open. The doors didn't just open, they were thrown wide with a force that rattled the hinges. A hush fell over the room that was different from before. The previous silence had been awkward, voyeuristic. This silence was revered. It was the silence of prey, noticing a predator. Walking through the doors was Malcolm Voss. Malcolm Voss was a myth in New York, a billionaire industrialist, a tech mogul, and a man who rarely left his private island in the Mediterranean. He was known for two things: his ruthless efficiency in business and his absolute hatred for public events. He was 6'3", wearing a tuxedo that was cut so sharply it looked like a weapon. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and currently sweeping the room like a searchlight. Behind him trailed a small army of assistants and lawyers, but Malcolm walked alone, dominating the space. Anderson Pierce, the host, immediately straightened his tie. Even he, a titan of real estate, bowed to the influence of Malcolm Voss. Pierce hurried forward, a practiced smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Voss," Pierce called out, extending a hand. "We didn't think you'd make it. What an honor to have you at the Obsidian Gala." Keaton Wells, sensing an opportunity to climb even higher, stepped away from Nyla and practically ran to stand next to his boss. He puffed out his chest, ready to be introduced to the most powerful man in the hemisphere. "Mr. Voss," Keaton said, his voice oily with charm, "I'm Keaton Wells, VP of Development. I've studied your acquisition strategies for years. Huge fan." Malcolm Voss didn't stop walking. He didn't shake Pierce's hand. He didn't even look at Keaton. It was as if they were ghosts. Malcolm walked straight through the VIP circle. He walked past the ice sculpture. He walked past the stunned Mira Steele. He walked straight to Nyla Parker. Nyla was frozen, tears still wet on her cheeks, the crumpled $100 bill near her feet. She looked up at the towering man, confused and terrified. Was he here to kick her out personally? Malcolm stopped 2 feet from her. The room held its breath. Slowly, deliberately, Malcolm Voss knelt. The crowd gasped. A billionaire, kneeling. Malcolm reached out, his long fingers brushing the marble floor. He picked up the crumpled $100 bill Keaton had thrown. He stood up, smoothed the bill out with terrifying precision, and turned to Keaton. For the first time, Malcolm looked at Keaton. His expression was one of utter boredom, mixed with lethal disgust. "Mr. Wells, is it?" Malcolm asked. His voice was low, a baritone rumble that vibrated in the chests of everyone nearby. Yes, Keaton stammered, his confidence evaporating instantly. "Keaton Wells." "You dropped this," Malcolm said. He didn't hand it back. He let it drop from his fingers, fluttering down to land on Keaton's expensive Italian shoes. "Try not to litter. It makes you look cheap." Keaton turned pale. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. Anderson Pierce looked horrified. Malcolm turned his back on Keaton, dismissing him entirely. He turned his full attention to Nyla. The harshness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a look of intense curiosity and respect. "Ms. Parker," Malcolm said softly. Nyla blinked, finding her voice. Do I know you? Not personally, Malcolm replied, but I know your mind. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of blue paper. It was a blueprint, not just any blueprint. It was a sketch Nyla had done years ago on a napkin, a design for a kinetic solar roof structure, something she had doodled while waiting for Keaton to finish a meeting. 3 years ago, you submitted a blind proposal for the Helios Sanctuary competition, Malcolm said. The submission was anonymous. It took my team 2 years to track the IP address to a laptop registered to a Keaton Wells. But when I met Mr. Wells, Malcolm glanced back at Keaton with a sneer. I knew immediately he didn't have the cognitive capacity to draw a stick figure, let alone the Helios geometry. Keaton choked. Mr. Voss, Silence, Malcolm snapped, without looking back. Malcolm turned back to Nyla. I kept digging. I found old permits, notarized sketches, all signed by N. Parker. You are the architect of the Helios, aren't you? Nyla's breath caught in her throat. The Helios Sanctuary was a theoretical project she had poured her soul into. She thought it had been lost in the divorce. Yes, that was me. Malcolm smiled. It was a rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. He extended his arm to her, elbow bent, offering her an escort. Miss Parker, I flew in from Zurich tonight for one reason. I am building the Helios. It will be the most expensive private residence in history, and I refuse to break ground unless the true genius behind it is leading the project. He looked at her thrifted dress, then at the stunned crowd. I was told the architect would be here. I see I found her. Malcolm's eyes drifted over her shoulder to Valentina Cruz, who was grinning wildly. And I see you have loyal friends. That is rare. Malcolm looked at Nyla's tear-stained face. This party is suffocating. My car is outside. I'd like to discuss your contract. The starting retainer is $5 million. Will you join me? Nyla looked at Keaton. He was trembling, his mouth agape, his eyes wide with panic as he realized the magnitude of what he had just lost. He looked at Anderson Pierce, who was glaring at him with fury. Keaton's career was disintegrating in real time. Nyla looked at Malcolm's hand. She took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and placed her hand in the crook of his arm. I would love to, Mr. Voss, Nyla said, her voice ringing clear and strong. Excellent, Malcolm said. He began to lead her away. As they passed Keaton, Malcolm paused one last time. He leaned in, close enough that only Keaton and the silent room could hear. Oh, and Wells, if you ever speak to my lead architect like that again, I will buy every company you work for just to fire you. Malcolm swept Nyla out of the ballroom, leaving a pale, shaking ex-husband in his wake. The doors closed. But for Nyla Parker, life was just opening up. The inside of Malcolm Voss's car was quieter than a cathedral. It was a sleek, black armored sedan that seemed to glide over the potholes of Manhattan rather than drive over them. The windows were tinted so dark that the flashing cameras of the paparazzi outside were reduced to faint, distant sparks, ghosts of a world Nyla had just escaped. Nyla Parker sat on the soft, hand-stitched leather, her hands trembling in her lap. The adrenaline that had carried her out of the ballroom, that fierce, white-hot energy, was fading, replaced by a sudden, crushing wave of imposter syndrome. She looked at the man sitting across from her. Malcolm Voss was typing on a tablet, his face illuminated by the cool blue light of the screen. He had loosened his tie, the first sign of humanity he had shown all night. He didn't look like a savior now. He looked like a predator, calculating his next kill. His focus was absolute, terrifying. "You're hyperventilating," Malcolm said, without looking up. His voice was low, cutting through the silence. "There is a bottle of sparkling water in the console. Drink it. Shallow breaths reduce oxygen flow to the brain. I need your brain oxygenated." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Neela fumbled with the latch, retrieved the glass bottle, and took a sip. The cold bubbles shocked her throat, grounding her. She took a deep breath, forcing her heart rate to slow. "Mr. Voss," she started, her voice barely a whisper. "What just happened back there?" Malcolm finally set the tablet down. He looked at her, his dark eyes analyzing every micro-expression. "A market correction, Ms. Parker. The market, in this case the architectural world, had undervalued your stock. I simply corrected the price." "You humiliated him," Nyla said, a strange mix of satisfaction and horror churning in her gut. "Keaton, you destroyed him in front of everyone. The press, the investors. He's ruined." "He destroyed himself," Malcolm countered, his voice devoid of pity. "I merely turned on the lights so everyone could see the wreckage. Men like Wells thrive in the shadows of other people's talent. He has been feeding off you for years, hasn't he?" Neela looked out the window at the blurring city lights. "He wasn't always like that. Or maybe I just didn't want to see it. I loved him once. I thought we were a team." "Love is a structural flaw if it's placed on a weak foundation," Malcolm said. He reached into a leather satchel and pulled out a thick document bound in black. He slid it across the seat toward her. "What is this?" "Your contract," Malcolm said. "Standard non-disclosure agreements, intellectual property rights, and your compensation package. As I said, the retainer is $5 million. The completion bonus is another 10. You will have full creative control over the Helios Sanctuary. No committees, no budget caps, just you and the physics of the impossible." Neela opened the folder. The numbers were staggering. It was more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. But her eyes snagged on a clause on page 4, written in bold. Clause 14, residency requirement. The lead architect must reside on-site at the Voss estate in the Hamptons for the duration of the design phase, approx 6 months. "I have to live with you?" Neela asked, looking up sharply. Panic flared in her chest. "I have a lease. I have a cat. I can't just—" Malcolm's lips twitched. "Bring the cat. The estate has 24 rooms. I'm sure we can find space for a litter box. As for the lease, break it." "Why is this necessary?" "Because the Helios isn't just a house, Neela. It's a machine, a living ecosystem. You can't design it from a studio apartment in Queens while listening to your neighbors argue through thin walls. You need to breathe the air where it will stand. You need to see how the light hits the cliffs at dawn. Unless you're afraid?" "Afraid of what?" "Of me," Malcolm said softly. "The rumors say I'm a recluse, a tyrant, a man who values machines more than people." Neela met his gaze. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt challenged. "I lived with Keaton Wells for 5 years, Mr. Voss. I know what a tyrant looks like. A tyrant is loud. A tyrant demands attention. You're just intense. You don't scare me." Malcolm smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. It transformed his face from granite to something warm, something dangerous in a different way. "Good. Then sign the papers. We have work to do." Nyla took the gold pen he offered. She thought of Keaton's face when he threw the crumpled bill at her. She thought of the years of silenced ideas, the stolen credit, the quiet nights crying in the bathroom while he slept soundly. She signed her name, Neela Parker. The ink was dark and permanent. "Welcome to the team, Nyla," Malcolm said. He tapped the partition glass. "Driver, take us to the airstrip. The helicopter is waiting." "Helicopter?" Neela squeaked. "I told you," Malcolm said, returning to his tablet. "I hate traffic, and the view of the coastline at night is inspiring. You might want to take notes." While Nyla was soaring over the Long Island Sound in a private helicopter, watching the world turn into a grid of glittering lights, Keaton Wells was experiencing the rapid, brutal gravity of rock bottom. The ballroom was emptying. The air, once filled with jazz and laughter, was now thick with the smell of stale champagne and judgment. Keaton stood near the bar, gripping a glass of scotch so hard his knuckles were white. He was waiting for the storm to pass. He told himself it was just a scene, a misunderstanding. Malcolm Voss was eccentric. People knew that. He could spin this. Keaton. The voice was like a gavel striking a block. Keaton turned to see Anderson Pierce standing behind him. The real estate tycoon looked furious. His face, usually composed for the cameras, was a mask of red-hot rage. "Anderson," Keaton forced a smile, stepping forward. "Listen, about that little show. Voss is clearly unstable. I can handle damage control. I'll put out a statement saying—" "You're fired," Pierce said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The words were final. Keaton froze. "What? You can't fire me. I'm the VP of Development. The Bayside contract is being reviewed by legal as we speak," Pierce interrupted. "Voss wasn't lying, was he? About the blueprints? I had my team pull the metadata from the Bayside files 10 minutes ago. The timestamps, the user logins. They don't match your schedule, Keaton. They match your ex-wife's." Keaton felt the blood drain from his face. "That proves nothing. She was my assistant. She just digitized my sketches." "You're a fraud, Keaton," Pierce spat. "And you're a liability. Malcolm Voss threatened to buy my company just to fire you. I'm saving him the trouble. Get out. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal effects. Anything proprietary stays." "Anderson, please. I have a mortgage. I have the lease on the Aston Martin. You can't do this." Pierce turned his back and walked away. Keaton stood there, panting, his world tilting on its axis. He looked around for an ally. His eyes landed on Mira Steele. She was standing by the cloakroom, wrapping a white fur stole around her shoulders. "Mira!" Keaton rushed toward her, desperate for a lifeline. Mira's family had old money. If he could just secure his engagement to her, he could survive this. "Mira, baby, let's get out of here. This place is toxic." Mira turned. Her beautiful face was cold, devoid of the warmth she had shown him an hour ago. She looked at him like he was a stain on her dress. "Don't touch me," she said, stepping back. "Mira, it's me. It's Keaton. Don't let them get in your head." "You were humiliated by a woman wearing a $50 dress," Mira said, her voice dripping with disdain. "And then you were dressed down by the most powerful man in the world like a naughty schoolboy. You aren't a power player, Keaton. You're a joke, and I don't date jokes." She snapped her fingers, and her driver appeared, taking her elbow. "Lose my number, Keaton." She walked out into the night, leaving him completely alone. Keaton stumbled out of the Pierce Tower and onto the sidewalk. It was raining now, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked his expensive tuxedo. He checked his phone. His notifications were exploding. The video of the confrontation was already viral. "Your Keaton Wells over" was trending on Twitter. He walked to his car, but the valet stopped him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wells. Mr. Pierce ordered us to hold the company vehicle. You'll have to take a cab." Keaton screamed. He kicked a trash can, sending it clattering into the street. Passers-by stared. A few took photos. 2 hours later, Keaton sat in a dim, smoky office in New Jersey, located behind a dry cleaner. The sign on the door read, Saul Frantic, Litigation and Liability. Saul was a man who looked like he was made of grease and cheap cologne. He sat behind a desk piled high with files, eating a meatball sub. So, Saul said, chewing loudly, let me get this straight. Your wife, ex-wife, is now the lead architect for Malcolm Voss? The guy who owns like half the internet? She stole my ideas, Saul. Keaton slammed his fist on the desk. The Helios Sanctuary. Those were my concepts. We talked about them over dinner years ago. She just drew them. Did you draw them? Saul asked. I described them. Vividly. That counts as intellectual property, right? Saul wiped tomato sauce from his lip and leaned back. Listen, Keaton, in a court of law, probably not. But if we file an injunction, we can freeze the project. Construction stops. Investors get scared. Voss hates bad press. He might settle just to make you go away. I don't want a settlement, Keaton hissed, his eyes manic. I want her destroyed. I want her to feel what I felt tonight. I want to take everything from her. Saul grinned, showing yellow teeth. Now you're speaking my language. We file for IP theft, breach of marital contract, and, let's throw in fraud. We claim the retainer is marital asset. We claim everything. We bury her in paper. Do it, Keaton said. I want the injunction served tomorrow. Keaton stared at the rain-streaked window. She thinks she's won. She thinks she can just walk away with my life. He smiled, a sinister, broken thing. The gala was just the opening battle. The war has just begun. 2 weeks had passed since the gala, and Nyla felt like she was living in a dream, or perhaps a very intense masterclass. The Voss estate in the Hamptons was not a house. It was a compound. Perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the churning Atlantic, it was a masterpiece of brutalist architecture, all concrete angles and floor-to-ceiling glass. It was beautiful, but cold. Neela had spent the first week terrified, but by the second week, the work had taken over. She stood in the main studio, a vast room with a panoramic view of the ocean. In the center of the room was a massive holographic table, projecting a 3D model of the Helios Sanctuary. Around her stood a team of 12 engineers, structural analysts, and materials scientists. They were the best in the world, and they were all looking at her with skepticism. The load-bearing capacity of the eastern cantilever is insufficient, said Dr. Aris Thorne, the lead structural engineer. He was an older man, with thick glasses and an attitude that suggested he didn't like taking orders from a woman half his age. If we use the glass density you've specified, the wind shear will shatter the atrium within a year. Neela looked at the hologram. She zoomed in on the cantilever. Her heart hammered in her chest. These people were geniuses. Who was she to correct them? She glanced at the corner of the room. Malcolm was sitting in a leather armchair, reading a book. He hadn't spoken a word in the hour-long meeting. He was letting her sink or swim. Don't shrink, Nyla told herself. You built this in your mind 1,000 times. You know the math. Dr. Thorne, Nyla said, her voice steady. You're calculating the load based on standard tempered glass, but the Helios doesn't use standard glass. Look at the specs on page 52. Thorne huffed, flipping through his tablet. I saw the specs. Photonic reactive silica. It's experimental. It's never been used on a scale this size. It has, Neela said. In aerospace, the tensile strength increases when exposed to UV radiation. The wind shear won't shatter it because the brighter the sun, the stronger the bond. And during a storm, The low pressure activates the piezoelectric sensors in the frame, causing the glass to vibrate at a frequency that cancels out the wind resistance. The room went silent. Thorne blinked, looking at the data again. He ran a simulation on the holographic table. The red warning lights turned green. The structure held. "My God," Thorne whispered. "She's right. It actually stabilizes the foundation." He looked at Neela with new eyes, not as an ex-wife, not as a charity case, but as an engineer. "I apologize, Ms. Parker. That is brilliant." "Thank you, Dr. Thorne," Neela said, suppressing a smile. "Now let's talk about the geothermal vents." From the corner, Malcolm closed his book. He stood up and walked over to her. The team parted like the Red Sea. "Good session," Malcolm said quietly, standing close enough that she could smell his sandalwood cologne. "I thought you were going to intervene," Neela admitted, wiping her sweaty palms on her pants. "And rob you of the victory." Malcolm shook his head. "I hired a wolf, Neela. I have no interest in muzzling her." There was a tension between them that hadn't been there before. It wasn't just professional respect. It was the electric charge of two sharp minds recognizing each other. Malcolm reached out, adjusting a stray lock of hair that had fallen over her forehead. His fingers lingered for a second too long, his touch warm against her skin. "Dinner is at 8, he said. "I'm making risotto. Don't be late." That night, the atmosphere in the estate shifted. They ate in the kitchen, not the formal dining room. Neela watched Malcolm stir the risotto, his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. It was domestic, intimate, and utterly confusing. "You cook?" Neela asked, sipping wine. "It's chemistry," Malcolm said. "Precision and timing. It relaxes me." He looked at her. "Keaton never cooked for you, did he?" "He couldn't boil water," Neela laughed bitterly. "And even if he could, he wouldn't. He thought domestic tasks were beneath him." "Nothing is beneath a man who wants to build a life," Malcolm said seriously. He served her a plate. "You deserve to be taken care of, Neela. Not just professionally, but completely." Neela's heart did a traitorous flip. She was falling in love with her job, and she was dangerously close to falling for her boss. But the bubble of happiness was about to burst. The next afternoon, Neela was in the garden, sketching a new design for the infinity pool. The sun was shining, the ocean was roaring, and for the first time in years, she felt safe. A black sedan pulled up to the front gate. It wasn't one of Malcolm's cars. It was a beat-up Toyota. A man in a cheap grey suit stepped out. He buzzed the intercom. "Delivery for Ms. Neela Parker," the voice crackled. Neela walked to the gate, confused. "I'm Neela." The man didn't smile. He handed her a thick manila envelope. "You've been served." Neela's stomach dropped. She tore open the envelope. "Superior Court of New York Plaintiff. Keaton Wells, Defendant. Neela Parker and Voss Industries. Nature of suit, intellectual property theft, breach of marital contract, fraud." The letters swam before her eyes. Keaton was claiming that the Helios Sanctuary was based on his original concepts. He was claiming that since they were married when she drew the initial sketches, the intellectual property belonged to the marital estate, of which he was the primary beneficiary. He wasn't just suing for money. He had filed an emergency injunction, order to cease and desist. All construction and design work on the Helios project must halt immediately pending a preliminary hearing. "No," Neela whispered, clutching the paper. "No, he can't do this. It's a lie." "Is there a problem?" Malcolm appeared behind her, his expression darkening as he saw her face. He took the papers from her trembling hands. He read the first page, and his face turned to granite. The temperature in the garden seemed to drop 10 degrees. "He's stopping the project," Nyla choked out, tears of frustration welling up. "He's going to drag this out in court for years. He knows he can't win, but he knows he can bleed us dry. He wants to destroy my chance." Malcolm looked at the papers, then at Nyla. He didn't look worried. He looked lethal. "He thinks this is a legal battle," Malcolm said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "He thinks he can use the law as a weapon against me." Malcolm tore the injunction in half. "He doesn't realize," Malcolm said, looking out at the ocean, "that I don't just play the game, Nyla. I own the board." He pulled out his phone. "Get the legal team, and get the private investigators. I want everything on Keaton Wells, every email, every text, every unpaid parking ticket since 2010. If he wants a war, let's show him what a nuclear winter looks like." Nyla watched him, fear mixing with awe. Keaton had started a fight with the billionaire. But as she looked at the fire in Malcolm's eyes, she realized something else. Malcolm wasn't just protecting his investment, he was protecting her. And that made him dangerous in a way Keaton could never comprehend. The Superior Court of New York was a somber place, usually reserved for corporate mergers and boring patent disputes. But today, Courtroom 4B was overflowing. Every seat was taken, and reporters lined the walls, their whispered exchanges hushed only by the crack of Judge Harrison's gavel. The air was thick with tension, smelling faintly of old paper and nervous sweat. The press had dubbed it the Architects' War, and everyone wanted to see the final showdown between the disgraced Keaton Wells and the elusive billionaire Malcolm Voss. Nyla sat at the defendant's table, wearing a tailored navy suit that Malcolm had personally selected for its clean lines and professional authority. She looked every inch the professional she was, but beneath the table, her hands were ice-cold, gripping the smooth marble edge. Across the aisle, Keaton sat with his lawyer, Saul Frantic. Keaton looked haggard. He hadn't shaved in 2 days, and his cheap suit looked a size too big, as if the stress had consumed his substance. But his eyes were manic. He smiled at Nyla, a confident, predatory grin that promised pain. "We are here for the preliminary injunction regarding the Helios Sanctuary IP," Judge Harrison stated, her voice sharp. "Mr. Frantic, you may proceed." Saul Frantic stood, hiking up his ill-fitting trousers. "Your Honor, the facts are clear. Mr. Wells and Ms. Parker were married when the conceptual work for the Helios Sanctuary began. The law is explicit. Marital assets. Mr. Wells, the visionary, directed her hand. He gave her the vision, the concept, the genius. She was merely the pencil in his hand, transcribing his intellect. Therefore, this retainer is a joint asset, and Mr. Wells's name belongs on the building. Voss Industries is complicit in marital fraud and IP theft. Keaton took the stand, radiating feigned sincerity. He played the victim perfectly, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief he pulled from his pocket. "I just wanted to help her," he lied to the packed courtroom, his voice cracking dramatically. "I let her draw while I dictated the advanced mathematical elements. It breaks my heart that she's now stealing my life's work with the aid of a frankly manipulative billionaire." Nyla felt a cold surge of anger. Keaton's capacity for self-deception was limitless. She glanced back toward the gallery. Valentina Cruz gave her a thumbs up, her expression a mix of fury and encouragement. The cross-examination began with the defense lawyer, but the questions were easily deflected. Keaton was a practiced liar, smooth and rehearsed. Then it was Malcolm's turn. Malcolm dismissed his high-powered counsel with a nod. He had received special permission to question the witness himself. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. and walked toward the witness stand. The air in the room changed instantly. The collective intake of breath from the gallery was audible. "Mr. Wells," Malcolm said, his voice smooth and dangerously low, like the sound of grinding metal. "You claim you dictated the entire mathematical geometry for the Helios roof, the photonic reactive silica structural formula, on the night of November 14, 2019. Is that correct?" "Yes," Keaton said, trying to hold Malcolm's gaze, but failing. "I remember it clearly. We were at the kitchen table, collaborating." "November 14th, Malcolm repeated, letting the date hang in the air. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit A. This concerns the location of Mr. Wells on that exact date." A large screen in the courtroom flickered to life, showing crystal-clear security footage. "Mr. Wells claims he was at his kitchen table in Queens. Inspiring genius," Malcolm said, his tone biting. "But this is security footage from the Sapphire Lounge in Manhattan. Time-stamped November 14, 2019, from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. The video played. It showed Keaton, clearly inebriated, laughing, drinking shots, and stumbling around a VIP booth with a woman who was decidedly not his wife, Mira Steele, or any other professional contact. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Keaton's face went white, his confident mask shattering. Saul frantically tried to object, but Judge Harrison waved him down. "And this," Malcolm continued, clicking a remote, "is the metadata from the computer-aided design (CAD) file that contains the core Helios structural geometry. It shows the file was created at 11:42 p.m. that same night, while you were occupied with a complete stranger in a high-end bar. Mr. Wells, Ms. Parker was alone in Queens, inventing a new form of structural geometry. Your collaboration, Mr. Wells, seems to have consisted of her working while you were committing marital infidelity." That's doctored. I was drinking. I was thinking," Keaton shouted, standing up and pointing a shaky finger at Malcolm. "He's a billionaire. He faked it." "Sit down, Mr. Wells," the judge warned with extreme sternness. "I'm not finished establishing the pattern of dependence," Malcolm said, unfazed. "Exhibit B." The screen changed again. It showed a devastating series of work emails. "Mr. Wells, you claimed you taught Ms. Parker how to use the advanced architectural software. Yet here are emails from 2018, sent from your work account to Ms. Parker, who was then your secretary." Malcolm tapped the screen, highlighting the subject lines. Subject line, "Help me. I can't figure this damn thing out. It keeps crashing." Subject line, "Fix the load calculations on the Bayside facade before Pierce sees it now." Subject line, "I'm too hungover to do the math. Just handle it, Nyla. I'll take you to dinner." Malcolm looked at the jury. "You didn't teach her, Keaton. You used her. You relied on her competence to cover your deficiency. The Bayside project, which launched your career, was her work. You are not an architect. You are a parasite." Keaton was shaking now, sweat pouring down his temples. Malcolm delivered the final, fatal blow, leaning onto the railing of the witness stand, bringing his face inches from Keaton's. "And as for the marital asset claim, the very basis of this injunction, did you forget the prenuptial agreement you forced Ms. Parker to sign 6 years ago?" Malcolm paused, waiting for the silence to deepen. "The one where you, Mr. Wells, insisted on Clause 7b, which specified that all intellectual property created by the individual remains the sole and exclusive property of the creator, free from any claims by the other party." Keaton froze. The air left his lungs in a wheezing gasp. He had forgotten. In his boundless arrogance, he had feared that Neela might one day eclipse him. and he had insisted on that clause to protect his perceived future stardom. Now, that paranoia was the very anchor that sank him. I, Keaton stammered, unable to form a single coherent word. No further questions, Malcolm said, turning his back on the ruined man. The judge didn't even need to recess. She adjusted her glasses, her expression severe. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates that the plaintiff, Keaton Wells, not only has no claim to the intellectual property, but actively sought to commit fraud upon this court and engaged in demonstrable acts of concealment and deceit. This lawsuit is frivolous, malicious, and frankly, embarrassing. The injunction is lifted immediately. Ms. Parker is the sole creator and owner of the Helios design. Furthermore, I am ordering Mr. Wells to pay Mr. Voss's legal fees, which I estimate to be in the range of $250,000, effective immediately. Keaton slumped in his chair, a defeated, empty shell. Saul, frantic, seeing his fee dissolve, began screaming at the paralegals. Neela felt a wash of euphoria. She looked at Malcolm, who winked at her, a subtle, warm gesture of triumph. It was the first time she had truly smiled in months. The chains were finally broken. 6 months later, the construction noise was gone. The dust had settled. The Helios sanctuary stood on the cliffs of the Hamptons like a diamond rising from the rock. It was a structure of impossible angles and shifting photovoltaic glass, a house that breathed with the wind, converted moisture into water, and drank the sunlight. It was a machine, yes, but more importantly, it was a home. It was the most complex, beautiful thing Nyla had ever seen, and she had built it. It was the night before the grand reveal, a massive, global media event. The workers had gone home, leaving the massive glass walls spotless. Nyla was standing on the main terrace, which cantilevered 200 feet over the churning Atlantic. She wore a simple cashmere sweater, the sea breeze cool against her face. She heard footsteps behind her. Malcolm walked out, holding 2 glasses of an ancient, amber-colored wine. "To the architect," he said, handing her a glass. "To the believer," she replied, clinking her glass against his, "and to the world's most patient client." They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the full moon reflect off the smooth, kinetic glass. The ocean provided the only sound, a rhythmic, grounding roar. "You know," Neela said, her voice soft, "Dr. Thorne apologized to me again today. He admitted that the piezoelectric frequency modulation for the storm dampening system was the most brilliant structural innovation he'd seen in 50 years. Malcolm nodded, sipping his wine. "It is. It works because you didn't see the house as a static object. You saw it as a piece of physics. That's what I paid for." "I think you paid for much more than physics, Malcolm." She turned to him fully. "Why did you want this house? Why a sanctuary? You are a man who commands nations of data. Why hide in glass?" Malcolm sighed, the sound heavy with old burdens. He looked out at the dark, vast ocean. "I grew up in a world of noise, Nyla. My father was Senator Robert Voss, famous for his roaring speeches and his quiet cruelty. My mother was an ambitious socialite. Everything was a performance for the public. Every smile was calculated. Every hug was a photo opportunity. I hated it. I craved authenticity." He lowered his voice. "When I was 10, my father caught me drawing blueprints for a soundproof room in the back of my textbook. He tore them up and told me I was wasting my genius on emotional indulgence. I wanted a place where the walls were transparent, where the truth couldn't be hidden, a place that stripped away the lies." He turned to her, his dark eyes intense, reflecting the moonlight. "When I saw your design," he confessed, "the preliminary sketches you drew on that napkin, I saw the same desire. You were trapped in a false life with Keaton, trapped behind walls of his making, drawing a house made of pure, naked truth. I didn't just fall in love with the geometry, Neela. I fell in love with the soul that drew it. The honest soul." Neela's breath hitched. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She set her glass down on the railing, her hand suddenly shaking. "Malcolm, I stayed because I wanted to finish the job. But I've stayed because for the first time, I don't have to edit myself to fit in. You accept the complexity." "I don't just accept it," Malcolm said, stepping closer. "I require it." He reached out, his hand gently tracing the line of her jaw. "The contract is over tomorrow, Nyla. You have your $10 million. You can go anywhere. You can build anything. But this house won't work without you. It will just be expensive glass and steel, and neither will I." His admission, raw and unexpected, was the most precious thing he had given her. She realized he wasn't terrifying at all. He was just a brilliant man who had built his own emotional fortress, and she, the architect, was the only person who knew the structural code to unlock it. "I don't want to go anywhere," Neela whispered, a tear of pure happiness tracing a path down her cheek. "I'm tired of building for other people. I want to build a life right here." Malcolm closed the distance. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands, wiping the tear away with his thumb. "Then stay. Not as my employee, as my partner. In everything." He kissed her. It was a powerful, patient kiss that felt like the missing keystone in her own damaged foundation. It wasn't about drama or performance, like everything Keaton had done. It was the absolute certain connection of two people who finally recognized their equal and authentic halves. Neela kissed him back, pouring every year of suppressed ambition and renewed hope into the moment. She was no longer a shadow. She was the light. The grand reveal of the Helios Sanctuary was the biggest architectural event of the decade. Helicopters circled overhead like metallic dragonflies, and the world's elite arrived by yacht and private jet. The house, gleaming white and sharp-edged against the blue Atlantic, looked impossibly futuristic. Neela Parker stood on the podium, not behind it, in front of the gleaming glass house. The flash of 1,000 cameras momentarily blinded her, but this time she didn't shrink. She wore a stunning white dress that flowed like marble, a symbol of purity and strength. Malcolm stood off to the side, his eyes fixed on her with unapologetic adoration. "For a long time," Neela told the rapt crowd, her voice carrying clear and steady over the sound system, "I thought my value was in how much I could help someone else shine. I thought I was a shadow. I was a structural support beam for someone else's fragile ego." She paused, gesturing toward the vast glass edifice behind her. "But a house built on lies will always crumble, no matter how shiny the exterior. We all have the right to stand in our own light. The Helios Sanctuary is not just a house, it's a monument to the power of authenticity." The crowd erupted in a standing ovation. Architectural Digest's editor-in-chief, Valentina Cruz, practically tackled her with a hug, screaming, "You did it, Parker! You are the queen!" Miles away, in a cramped, moldy basement apartment in Newark, New Jersey, a man sat on a stained mattress, the damp air smelling of mildew and old beer. Keaton Wells was watching the live stream on a cracked smartphone. He was wearing a stained t-shirt, and his face was drawn and unshaven. He had lost his condo, his car, and his last shred of credibility. Anderson Pierce had blacklisted him industry-wide, and even Saul Frantic, had stopped returning his calls after the legal fees were impossible to pay. He was currently working the night shift at a warehouse, packing boxes for minimum wage, using a fake name. He watched Nyla on the screen. She looked radiant, powerful, unreachable. Every word she spoke was a hammer blow to his remaining pride. "That should have been mine," Keaton muttered, taking a swig of warm, cheap beer. "She stole it. She set me up. She seduced that freak Voss." He had tried everything. He had sent pathetic, desperate texts to Mira Steele, who responded only with a laughing emoji. He had written a rambling, incoherent letter to Anderson Pierce, begging for his job back, which was returned unopened. He was a ghost in the city he once ruled. As he watched, the camera zoomed in. Nyla looked directly into the lens, addressing the global audience. For a second, Keaton felt like she was looking right at him, through the screen, into his sad, dark basement. "I want to thank my past," Nyla said on the screen, her voice filled not with bitterness, but with calm finality, "for showing me exactly what I didn't want to be, and for teaching me that the only person who can define your worth is yourself." She turned and walked into the arms of Malcolm Voss, who lifted her slightly off her feet in a powerful embrace. The applause was deafening. Keaton's phone battery, old and failing, gave up the ghost. The screen went black, plunging the basement room into miserable darkness. He was left in the silence, alone with the echoing roar of the woman he had tried to crush, a woman who now stood in the blinding light of her own magnificent foundation. His final thought was not of remorse, but of pure, impotent rage. And that is the story of Nyla Parker. She went from being insulted, discarded, and humiliated to becoming the most celebrated architect in the world, finding true love with a man who saw her worth when no one else did. Keaton Wells learned the hardest lesson of all. When you try to bury someone, you better make sure they aren't a seed, because if they are, all you're doing is helping them grow. What did you think of Malcolm's revenge? Do you think Keaton got what he deserved, or should he have suffered more? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a daily dose of drama.